live. For those of you who are watching this in real time, please, okay, and this tells me all except Facebook destinations. That's interesting. Huh, okay, whatever. For those of you watching this live, please put something in a comment and tell me that you can hear me. I have a time-honored tradition of having an issue with my microphone. I blame it on the accent, but it must be hardware difficulties. But anyhow, today's live cast is a little bit different from what I usually do. I do not plan to cover a whole lot or anything probably pertaining to guns and optics unless something comes in through the Q&A later in the live stream. After a long break, I want to revisit the war in Ukraine. For those of you who have been following this, to give you sort of a general synopsis, if you wish, the whole festivities in Ukraine started in February, and there has been some debate about whose fault it is, but we know only a couple of things for sure, and one of them that we know for sure is that Russia attacked Ukraine, and we can talk a little bit about the origin of this thing in some detail if you'd like. There are certain things that are clear. Ukraine is an independent country, and based on how Ukrainians have been reacting to the invasion from Russia, they kind of like the idea of being an independent country. I think that's important, and it is really important to recognize. With the fog of war being what it is, for me sitting here in the United States, it's very difficult to know for sure what is happening where and how. But there are a couple of things we know for sure. We know that Russia started this, and we know that Ukrainians don't want to be Russians. Now that it's been going on for a little while, we know more. In the beginning, it looked a little bit hairy for Ukraine, but they were able to withstand the initial onslaught. And more recently, they've been counterattacking quite effectively. So where it is all going is kind of looking odd, because as far as the conventional warfare goes, Russia is not doing all that well. And toward the end of this, we'll talk a little bit about what are possible ramifications of the most recent developments. Now, when I said the fog of war, and it's hard for me to see what's happening, I wasn't joking. That's why I have a couple of guests. One of the guests here is Eugene, who has been with me on every Ukrainian podcast. He has a much better military background than I do, so he has a better understanding what is happening. I also have a new guest, Paul. Unlike me or Eugene, Paul has actually spent some time in Ukraine during the war. I'll bring him on in a moment, and he'll tell you his background and what he was up to. But I know he spent at least a month or so there in April, May, which was kind of a interesting time to be there. And he got into Ukraine from Poland, so he managed to traverse from Polish border the entirety of the country, Kiev and Kharkiv, and a bunch of other places. And he'll tell us a little bit what he saw, the spirit of the people, and his take on what is happening. Right. At this point, I'm going to bring the gentleman on. Eugene, Paul, are you guys ready? Nod if you're ready. Excellent. Well, here's Eugene. I think you've seen this face before. And here's the new victim, Paul. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
Did I say anything unintelligible in this introduction, or so far so good?
I'm happy.
Excellent. Well, that makes one of us. All right. I'm an old cynic. I'm never happy. I'm less irritated than usual. That's about as happy as I get.
Fair enough.
All right. So where shall we start? Paul, you want to give us a little background on how you ended up here, meaning on this live cast?
Sure. I know Eugene socially, and he introduced me to you, and that's how I am here. I can dive into my background very briefly if that's of any interest.
Please do.
Awesome. Grew up in Russia. I am Armenian by descent, but I'm I think third generation of Armenians who grew up in Russia, and lived in Russia until I graduated from high school, and then came over to the United States. Did a lot of interesting things. Worked in a bunch of tech companies, amongst other things, and got to go to Ukraine and see a little bit for myself what's going on there. And again, the last thing I want to do is I don't want to overstate my impact on the battlefield by any stretch of the imagination. I just looked into the keyhole of action a little bit and would love to chat about that.
Okay. All right. So we'll get to that next. First, while I have both of you here, I want to touch on a little bit onto this origin of thing, because when Russia attacked Ukraine, there was all sorts of interesting accusations flying about. And that Ukraine is full of Nazis, that NATO is planning to attack Russia, that NATO is infringing on Russian sphere of influence, Ukraine is not a natural state, all sorts of good stuff. Eugene, Paul, either one of you want to address this? I mean, everybody kind of knows where I stand on this, right? Honestly, I think it's a bunch of nonsense.
But pass the baton on to Eugene, maybe then.
Sure, absolutely. So those talking points are not new. They came up before the conflict periodically, whenever it was advantageous. Obviously, those living in the United States, it's pretty clear United States was not poised to attack Russia. I think we would see very obvious signs if this was not the case. And again, I find it silly to assume that if not United States, then Belgium was planning to do this. So clearly there was no existential threat to Russia that anybody could possibly imagine. In fact, there were not even significant troop mobilization or readiness anywhere in a NATO country at the time. So in terms of sphere of influence, this argument comes up. In fact, our current director of CIA is one of the adherents historically of this view. It's interesting because it strips states of their identity and self-determination. Somehow some states end up in somebody else's sphere of influence, and it seems like they have no choice in the matter. Again, put yourself in a situation where you're one of those states and you're told you ended up in Iranian sphere of influence, so by no means any other country is allowed to help, and you're not allowed to determine anything but theocratic Shia as your determination. So yeah, I think in terms of Nazis, we're obviously all on the same page in terms of none of us are pro-Nazi. Some of us
yeah, really.
Yeah, but I think I'll let
try to tell me this Jewish-Armenian coalition here is not pro-Nazi. Just making sure.
Yeah. But I have a kind of interesting anecdote, not from my personal experience, but from an interview I saw in one of the Russian channels. But I'll let Paul maybe touch on this first.
Indeed, and I think what's important for us to remember is that Ukrainians treat this as the full-scale war, but they were in war with Russia since 2014, and this is going to come in handy when we're going to be talking about Ukrainian military and its performance. They were full-blown operations and a shooting war with tanks and artillery since 2014. For some of your listeners who may not be familiar with it, Russia de facto annexed some areas in Donbass, specifically Luhansk and Donetsk. And I think we all agree that not only was Russia supplying the terrorists in those areas with weapons, but also pushed Russian troops. There was a lot of Russian armor in there. So for context, this is not super new. I think the scale of what's going on is very, very new and in candor, to me, quite unexpected. But this has been going on for quite a bit. One of the claims that Russia laid that I want to definitely dissuade everyone from is that Ukrainians had this war against the Russian language, and I wanted to see it for myself. So personal experience is that I intentionally spoke Russian throughout my trip in Ukraine, and it, to your point, started in the Polish-Ukrainian border, went through Lviv, and Lviv is very pro-Western, if you will, and has traditional Ukrainian culture. Well, went all the way to Kiev, and of course ended up in Kharkiv, which is a predominantly Russian-speaking city. I went through multiple checkpoints. I talked to dozens, if not 100, military personnel, regular Ukrainians. Not one time did anybody express outrage or anger or in any way, shape, or form told me that it's inappropriate to speak Russian to them. Some did respond in Ukrainian, which I understood for the most part of it. But
So you don't speak Ukrainian?
I do not. No, as I've been involved in this for going on 8 months, I have my understanding of Ukrainian certainly improved, but I definitely don't speak it. I understand. I want to say like 85% of it by now. Listen to a lot of Ukrainian TV, but yeah, I don't speak Ukrainian. I never spoke to Ukrainians in Ukrainian. And I have gotten precisely zero pushback. On the contrary, and this is also something we can talk about, I've gotten a lot of gratitude from folks who went, and it went from people, random people I've never met, hugging me, thanking me for coming over to help. I got a couple of kisses on the cheek and handshakes, high fives, fist bumps.
Damn.
Right?
Okay. That's bravery right there.
Yeah, I think those people were maybe drunk, but it is bravery. Yeah.
Well, so to play devil's advocate for a moment, we talk about Ukrainians' right to self-determination, with which I wholeheartedly agree. And then we talk about Donetsk and Lugansk, that Russia annexed them, right? But the official theory is that they decided to separate from the Ukraine. Do they have a right for self-determination, or is this all just drummed up by Russia, or what's happening there?
I mean, I think historically, let's discuss general right of determination and then maybe specifically Ukraine. Historically, it's been a thorny issue. So most regions do not decide by plain referendum to exit any union. And in fact, China is very much against such self-determination. And this is one of the big friction points between China and Russia at the moment. Again, we have examples in Spain with Basques who've been wanting to separate for a while. So it's never as easy as we decide to hold a referendum, 51% wins, you exit, right? I think definitely there is no reason for Ukraine to be held to a different standard here. I do think there was genuine polarization within Ukraine in terms of how pro-Russian they wanted to be, covering mainly kind of historically ethnic regions where there is a difference between being pro-Russian, maintaining close ties with Russia, versus being formally part of Russian Federation. But I think the kind of views covered the spectrum, and probably Paul can give a little bit better view of how's that develop.
Sure. I definitely don't view myself as an expert in this field by any stretch of the imagination.
It's okay. We're on the internet. Everybody here is an expert.
Yes. at least two opinions, and sometimes in conflict with each other, right? So what I do know is that there was a significant infusion of the Russian-speaking population into those regions. There was a significant exodus of Ukrainian populations from these regions. So I think that these referendums were manufactured. And to Eugene's point, let's imagine we're going to go to Tijuana and we're going to say, hey, folks, join the United States, and most people will agree. Candidly, I bet you if we go to some impoverished regions in Russia and we're going to say, would you like to be part of the United States? Most people would probably say yes. This is not how it should be done. This is Ukrainian territory.
Referendums work. Correct.
Exactly.
So I will say this. I don't want to dwell on this one too much, but I will say this, right? So right now, I'm kind of moving forward a little bit. Russia is trying to formally annex the eastern Ukraine, Donetsk and Lugansk, and they just did what they call referendum, and they turned out to be 94% in favor of joining Russia. Having grown up in Eastern Europe, I can tell you with a great degree of certainty that there has never, ever been a time when 94% of the people, they agreed on anything, right? If they're saying 94%, that means Russia is lying. And the fact that Russia has to lie means that it's not quite as unanimous as they claim it is, right? They were There was no real referendum. They just wrote in a couple of numbers on the card.
Of course.
And if they were confident in people in Donetsk and Lugansk being willing to be Russians, would have something. Maybe that let the actual voting happen. They didn't. They were not leaving anything to chance.
You're talking about the latest referendum, right?
The latest one, correct.
Okay.
And of course,
no reason to think that the original one was anything different, right?
Yeah, and of course, I mean, we've seen soldiers accompanying pollsters with weapons going up and down stairs, going into people's apartment. I mean, if somebody comes into my house with a couple of rifles and asks me my opinion, I don't think, and I know what they want to hear. That's exactly what I'm going to tell them.
Yeah, I think that it's very difficult to claim any truthfulness to the current referendum. Russia actually pulled out the folks that were working on preparing a referendum. It was supposed to take multiple months, and then they changed their mind, and preparation, voting, everything took 1 week. Now, one thing that they forgot to decide is which territory actually decided to formally be part of Russia. And they're still...
But it's 94%.
Yes, I mean, definitely everybody wants to, but it's not clear who exactly. So it seems like, so Russia has no borders at the moment. Everything is Russia. So this question was pressed during press conference, and Putin's spokesman said that will of the people will decide, to which journalists asked a follow-up question, are you saying another referendum? And he said, no referendum, they'll just decide. So nobody knows what that means.
I guess it's been decided for them already, right?
No, it's still an open question, actually. Russia has not...
Give it 5 minutes. Right. All this referendum was complete horseshit. I'm not so convinced there has ever been a fair election in Russia. Maybe in Ukraine, even there, it's a reasonable concern. All right, let's move on to the actual war. Let's see. Let's spend a couple of minutes on how it all started, the initial thrust, and then kind of the vector of the war, how it all developed. Who wants to take this on?
Eugene,
I see a volunteer.
Eugene, do you want to take a stab at it, and I'll add to it?
Sure. So, to the best of our understanding, this was supposed to be a blitzkrieg campaign of 3 days or so. In fact, Russia expected very little resistance throughout Ukraine, to the point where National Guard, which is essentially police troops, were a significant fraction of the assaulting force, since expectation was that mainly it's going to be keeping the riots and kind of maintaining order as the biggest concern. So attack happened on several fronts, south, north, and from the east. And initial thrust was pretty devastating. So from the north, they came all the way into the suburbs of Kiev. From the south, they almost encircled Kharkov. And advanced somewhat from initial positions in Lugansk and Donetsk. And from the south seemed to be the most successful direction. Essentially, forces met very little resistance at first, and they're able to go all the way to Kherson region and take significant chunk of Zaporozhye. So I think, Paul, I'll let you describe the Kyiv events since you're closer to the ground.
Yeah. To be clear, I was not there, but from what I saw and from what I heard from a lot of folks who were there, it actually was a pretty close call. I think there's going to be books written about, for example, the battle for Hostomel Airport, which essentially the plan there was to land airborne troops, secure the airfield, the classic airfield raid and seizure, and then start bringing motorized rifle units and assault troops to push to Kiev. We shouldn't forget that there were Russian saboteurs and saboteur teams 10 miles away from Rada, which is the Ukrainian parliament. So Russians came in pretty close. There was this, of course, you're familiar with, like a 40-mile plus armored column that was pushing towards Kiev. If Russians were a solid military and their planning was better, it would have been a very different story. I think it was. I think very few of us realize how close it actually was to Russians assaulting into Kiev. I don't know if they would have taken it. I very strongly doubt that they would have held it, but it was a close call.
But so we're basically 5 minutes from street fighting in Kiev.
We were close. I don't know if it was 5 minutes, but very, very close. Yes, it would have been a matter of a couple of days.
Okay.
And this would have been an absolute disaster. You may remember how there were trucks in the streets of Kiev of weapons and ammo, and they were handing them over to regular citizens and reserve people in the reserves, and just saying, "Hey, here's an AK-74 with, 5 mags. Figure it out," which is crazy.
Interesting. Yeah.
It's not clear that in terms of overall plan. Definitely, it was expectation of short decapitating strike and no organized resistance. It's still mysterious to me how miscalculated they were, because again, Ukraine is not a closed country. Any Russian-speaking person can just drive and talk to people, look around. It's very easy to recon the area. But it's still unclear to me what was the plan afterwards, because holding down 40 million person hostile country, even if there is no organized resistance, is very expensive multi-year endeavor.
I mean,
I surmise that the genius plan there was to take Kiev, to install a puppet president in there, and certainly, like, I don't see them going all the way to Lviv and occupying Lviv and Lvivshchina in general, or pushing all this far into the west. That's a very aggressive plan, maybe with time, but at least taking eastern and central Ukraine, Kryvyi Rih, maybe Odessa, not out of the realm of possible. They certainly messed it up on multiple fronts. Everything from pushing too much armor onto the roads where they just got stuck. And then I think somebody's interested in the UAV portion of the conversation, when drones and artillery on the Ukrainian side of the house were able to make a huge dent in that armored column, to not pushing enough airborne troops into Hostomel, and Ukrainian military was able to repulse that. Again, I think that battle, as well as the battle for Moshun and other areas close to Kiev, this is something that we're going to read about in history books later on.
Quite possibly. So why did Russia's initial push fail? I mean, it sounds like Russian leadership, Putin and whoever else, sort of bought into their own bullshit, thinking that Ukraine is just going to welcome them with open arms. And that wouldn't be the first time in history where generally intelligent, calculating people believe their own theories a little bit too much. So that's not that unexpected. How did the Ukrainians respond? I always thought of the Ukrainian society being quite deeply divided, as Eugene alluded to earlier, with the Eastern Ukraine being Russian-speaking and Western Ukraine, Ukrainian-speaking. How did the Ukrainians react? How is it different now that you've had a chance to traverse across essentially the whole of Ukraine? How did it differ between different parts of it?
So what I have seen is, and when I talk to folks, it was, for a lot of folks, it was very, very unexpected. It was absolutely shocking. It was very scary and unbelievable, that just people couldn't believe it. And I think the first maybe couple of weeks, there was a lot of confusion and fear and apprehension. But then I think people saw that Ukrainian armed forces held it together. The president held it together. If he would have run, I think it would have been a very different situation. But he basically said, hey, we're going to stand fast. We're going to fight. And I think that galvanized people. And then they started to get little wins and bigger wins at chipping away at the problem and publicizing it. And that sort of turned the process around a little bit, and little by little. And now it's an avalanche that there is no way that Russia can stop.
So, Ukrainian president before all this whole thing had some political issues. He wasn't the most popular political figure in Ukraine. Now, I assume he's enjoying very widespread popular support, right?
No question about it. And what's interesting is that Ukrainian society galvanized around the president, who incidentally, from what I understand, and please correct me if I'm wrong, was not a native Ukrainian speaker to begin with.
No,
He's
he was native Russian
Jewish.
speaker.
Exactly. He's Jewish. He did not, to your point, enjoy a very high approval rating, but he proved himself and his military and his advisors, his Minister of Defense, his Chief of General Staff, Aristovich, who is sort of their PR person, they proved to be phenomenal people. And Ukrainians certainly galvanized around that. And in candor, I think Putin is the biggest unifier of Ukraine, because I have never seen Ukrainians rally around the Ukrainian flag and the Ukrainian language, interestingly enough, even in Kharkiv, even in eastern Ukraine, in this way. And this changed Ukrainian society and its destiny as a country, I believe.
Oh, interesting. So Putin for Ukraine is kind of like Obama for Middle East. He finally managed to make peace between Jews and Arabs by supporting Iran, right?
That's exactly what went down, I think.
Yeah.
It's actually an interesting point. Is I think Ukraine was looking for this beautiful birth of the nation story. And while history of Ukraine is long, there was no kind of one big heroic struggle to point to. And that's why they were looking at people like Bandera, etc., who had very checkered history and interesting views, didn't really accomplish anything as impressive, and they wouldn't stick for obvious reasons. They were not the person.
Correct.
Now, current events are, I think, what the nation was looking for in some sense.
That's actually, I didn't think about that. That's a really interesting point. So a short Jew with legal education ends up being a unifying figure for Ukraine. Go figure.
Yeah, and the Minister of Defense is Jewish as well.
Oh, I didn't know
right?
that. Okay.
Yeah, incredible person, unbelievably intelligent. Yeah, so I think all of this. Who is Jewish? I met a half Armenian gent who was born and raised in Ukraine. Very interesting guy. He was in Ukrainian special operations for a very long time. And one of his closest comrades was an Azerbaijani, allegedly a mortal enemy of Armenians. And yet, I'm like, how are you guys getting along? He's like, we couldn't care less. We're one nation. So this whole we're one nation, we're one people, and more, we're one language. This becomes the prevalent theme in Ukraine. It's very interesting, and I'm overjoyed at this. I can't tell you, how heartening this is for me.
That is indeed interesting. So we've got an interesting question that's sort of relevant here. Would Russian language be banned in Ukraine in the future? I don't think so. I honestly don't think so.
No way.
Because I don't think it's about having many languages. It is about having one main one.
Yeah. So I think what's going to happen, and you'll find this interesting. By accident, I ended up at a funeral of a Ukrainian soldier who was killed around Kharkiv. Kharkiv is an incredibly Russian-speaking city. Very few folks there spoke Ukrainian until very recently. And every single person, including the comrades of the soldier, including the family of that soldier, friends of that soldier, every single person at that funeral spoke Russian. But I think that we're going to see, and correctly, I am a huge fan of this. I can't tell you how happy I am about the fact that I think that the Ukrainian government is going to support Ukrainian language. And that's the way it should be. I don't see Russian being banned. I in candor, like, Ukrainians are such generous and wonderful people that I don't think that they're going to hold you speaking Russian against them, as long as you're supporting that country. If you're going to show up in Ukraine and say, hey, I'm Russian and Russia is a great country and glory to Russia, you're going to be in trouble, no question about it. Especially after Russia, what Russia has done to Ukraine.
Correct.
But can I travel to Ukraine and talk to my friends in Russian and walk the streets of Kiev unmolested? No question about it.
Okay. Well, that's an interesting follow-up question. There we go. What were the percentage of people in Ukraine who speak both languages? Close, probably 90%. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't
would
think
say
there are very
so.
many people who don't speak Russian in Ukraine.
Oh, who don't speak Russian?
Correct.
I think that there is
Maybe in Western Ukraine.
Yeah, a material amount of folks, especially more and more as this war is going on, who do not want to learn Russian. Particularly to your point in Western Ukraine, like this. So all of Carpathian Mountains, like remote locations in Lvivshina, for instance, in Lviv itself, I would imagine they're not very keen on speaking Russian, and a lot of them speak English. So if you go to Lviv, it's an ultra Western city. You can imagine being in Hungary or in Poland, where young people certainly strongly prefer speaking English or Ukrainian, and some of them cannot speak any Russian, or very little.
I would imagine more or less anybody our age or older has to speak Russian. That was part of the Soviet Union.
Yes, I would imagine so. Unless you're in,
perhaps not.
Yeah. Unless you're in rural Ukraine and you didn't have to serve in the Russian Soviet army, and you didn't have much to do with it. But yeah, normally most people will speak some Russian.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
All right. So going back to the war, I don't know if I want to ask you how you ended up there, what you were doing there, and you can answer or not. That is entirely up to you. What I want to pull up is Eugene put together this interesting couple of slides for us based on the maps from Institute for Study of War, ISW. And I'm going to share the screen, and it will basically show the areas controlled by Russia on March 4th and on October 4th, a couple of days ago. I just need a moment to figure out how to share a screen. I changed my live casting service, and everything is weird. They asked me whether I really want to do it 28 times, share my screen in such a dangerous environment online. Let's see if this works. Okay, I think we're almost there. Here we go. Okay.
That's a good look. So that's a great look.
That is an interesting look. Eugene, thank you for finding these maps. I think pictures speak louder than words. On the left, I assume you guys can see my mouse. On the left is what was on March 4th, and everything in red was the parts essentially controlled by Russia. And here is roughly the same scale map on October 4th, after Ukraine started its counteroffensive. In blue are the areas they have retaken recently, and this red pink are the areas that Russia has managed to control. Crimea from 2014, and this area in Donetsk, Lugansk also since 2014. And the lighter pink parts is what they are controlling now after they attacked Ukraine this year. The picture is stark. Ukraine is clearly making an impact. So how is a country of 40 million people able to successfully resist a country of 100 million people?
142 million.
That was before the invasion.
Yeah, and counting down very quickly.
Yeah.
I have a point of view, and my point of view is, first of all, Russian military has proven to be a knight in a knight that's basically is dying inside of its armor. It is incredibly incompetent when it comes to their special operation forces. They're decent. But anything else, like regular infantry, motorized infantry, supply, by the way, Eugene will back me up. We will love making fun of supply folks. I will tell you what, it's all logistics. It's all logistics. And Ukrainians are phenomenal at targeting exactly what needs to be targeted. What needs to be targeted are fuel depots, ammo depots, command and control centers, communication centers, and Ukraine knows exactly where to put rounds on target and how to do it. So I think it's both just the intelligence and dedication of Ukrainian people and a tremendous sacrifice of their frontline troops and general woeful incompetence of Russian military and a very low morale and it's getting worse and worse.
The last couple of decades listening to how much money Russia has invested into modernizing its military. Where did it all go? Is it all invested into country houses of various generals, or what happened?
Absolutely. There? So a good friend of mine, I think, said it beautifully. Russia is a country that is based on corruption, lies, incompetence, and cruelty. And I wholeheartedly agree with it. Unfortunately, it is my homeland after all, but that's just the way it is. And yeah, it's unbelievably corrupt. You saw those like silly autonomous robots that the Russian military was showcasing that turned out to be basically a staff bot of Alibaba and basically put together like you and I can do a better job. I think that this kingdom of mirrors where nobody knows what's going on and a complete inability to control this machinery is what brought us to where we are. Eugene, would love to hear what you think.
That's absolutely correct. I think there are some specific pathologies that we see in the Russian military. It's always been very top-down. And if you look kind of one of the slides also have in this presentation, the Russian kind of control center at Moscow, which is this huge building where 1,000 generals sit together and decide on the next move by the military. We have not been running, I have kind of separate comment about this, but like US has not been running military operations this way since Vietnam. Because we have learned and they have not. So there is a lot of that. There is very little trust between the ranks, and you have generals who have to be in the field. Otherwise, they do not believe that their orders are being executed. Ukraine, at this point, at least based on the folks that I've been talking to who are in the military there, is very Western in a sense that there is distributed decision making. Local commanders understand higher intent but use their own judgment. So it's much more agile, easier to execute, easier to adopt. Russian military has difficulties with that. We mentioned supply. I think supply is often overlooked, and when you build your reputation on blitzkrieg special forces campaign, it's very hard to understand the depth of incompetence on the supply side.
Forgive the interruption, but how can supply be overlooked if 2,000 years ago the Roman Empire sort of proved that that's how you win wars?
Well, I mean, if you look at a Russian tank regiment, half of those tanks are broken. So there is the first row of tanks that's working, and then there is a second row of tanks that need to be towed. And this is endemic in everything that they do. A lot of this stuff is stolen. A lot of this stuff is not working. A lot of this stuff is broken. So when push comes to shove, and you need to get that regiment moving, there's going to be a lot of issues that are going to be uncovered. They cannot really withstand significant stress tests the way that that United States military, for example, can.
I think also part of it is significant delta between first, second, third echelon troops. where in United States, obviously special forces go through more training, they're more capable, but infantry can hold their own, even army can do stuff.
So for those who don't know, Eugene served in the Marines. If he says even army can do stuff, that's the first I hear that from him.
Yeah. In Russia, it's kind of binary. So there is special forces, elite units, paratroopers, naval infantry, and so on. Once you're out of those, you probably have shot once in your life.
True. And as corruption is getting to the point of being absurd, even the airborne troops are not getting anywhere near the time behind the weapon that even regular army units in the United States are getting. Gas is stolen, catalytic converters are stolen, sites are stolen and sold. That's endemic everywhere you go. And there is alcoholism, corruption, incompetence. Nobody really wants to do anything. And this definitely shows. Again, that stress test, Russian troops can't really withstand it.
So what you're trying to tell me is that Russian war readiness has not changed dramatically since I left in 1991.
I think it changed to the worst, significantly to the worst.
That's impressive, actually. So a couple of quick things. On corruption, one of the things that happened, right? So when Russia attacked Ukraine, and there are a bunch of people on the right in the United States, to my great amazement, immediately came out on supporting Russia, and it's all America's fault. One of the more amusing charges was when Russia accused Ukraine of being corrupt. And now, Ukraine is corrupt, right? Everything in Eastern Europe is corrupt. But Russia accusing anyone of corruption is, it's hubris to the unimaginable degree. Because if anybody wrote a book on corruption, it would be Russia. It's like Latin American countries. You know, everybody says they're corrupt. Compared to Eastern Europe, they're rank amateurs.
I mean,
we see this everywhere.
Yeah, I don't want to understate the level of corruption in Ukraine. It definitely was there before the war. It's still there. If you work in Ukrainian aid, you have to deal with those concerns all the time as well. So, yeah, I mean, it would be unfair to claim that this is a Russian-only problem.
Not at all. No. It's a very common problem. The point I'm trying to make is that Russia sort of wrote a book on that.
No question.
Yep. Okay. And going back, there was a question on languages that I missed earlier. So if we can track back. Why do you think Ukraine did not want to make two national languages like Canada? Thoughts?
Again, this is my opinion, pure conjecture. In candor, if I were Ukrainian, and frankly, strangely enough, I feel like I am Ukrainian. I'm very invested emotionally in victory. After everything that you can say broader Soviet Union, but to them Russia has done, including Golodomor, the famine that was manufactured, and of course it was endemic to all of Soviet Union. Elimination of wealthy farmers, occupation of Western Ukraine. I would think twice, to be honest with you. Why do I need Russian as a second official language? Now, needless to say, people are welcome to speak Russian, but I would not be open to having Russian as a second language.
So the follow-up there is that Nadia thinks that the language issue not Nadia, second guest always thinks that the language issue in 14-15 was probably a mistake. I don't know if it was a mistake, and I'll explain. No. So for Canada, it's very easy to have two languages. They already had English, I mean, they're sort of part of the British Empire, and they have a bunch of French-speaking people, and they can dedicate a province to be French-speaking without any real risk because they don't have an aggressive France at their border. They're an ocean away. If you have an aggressive Russian-speaking enormous neighbor next to you, you may want to be very, very careful in trying to blend in with them too much. Yes. current adventures show.
Could not agree more. And also, again, let's not forget the fact that a lot of Russian media and government are saying that Ukrainian is not an actual language. Ukrainians are basically Russians. Ukrainian culture is a derivative of Russian culture. Like, I disagree with this vehemently. I think
Well, I
that
mean,
it's
that's a bunch of nonsense. I actually did I did
absolutely
a live stream on that a while back, going a little bit into the history, because Russia and Ukraine are clearly related cultures, but the separation happened during the Mongol occupation of Russia hundreds of years ago, because Russia proper was fully occupied by the Mongols. And what became Ukraine was really part of the Lithuanian Duchy for the most part. And that's where the cultural divide happened. They have been culturally different places. It's not unrelated, but definitely different.
no question. Could not agree more.
All right.
And again, nobody prohibits people from speaking Russian. Nobody does. You can speak any language you want in Ukraine, but Ukraine should be supporting its native language, Ukrainian, its culture, and its history. No question.
To be honest, I find it even difficult to entertain question of determining borders based on ethnic identity. Russia is not homogeneously Russian. If you go further to the east, very few people are ethnically Russian there.
Are you trying to tell me that all those Chechen soldiers are all not ethnically Russian?
Right. So, kind of argument either it goes both way, or this is not how we make countries. United States does not need to explain why they're not descendants of British to insist on its sovereignty.
Well, with the three Americans on this live stream, which one of us exactly is a descendant of the British?
I think I can help.
Hey, I told you guys I did a genetic test, right? And I'm 99.6% Jewish and 0.4% Native American. So I'm more Native American than Elizabeth Warren, and I absolutely belong here.
I would love to learn more about how that went down.
Yeah, I'm still applying for the teaching position at Harvard. Okay, so this is actually a good question. That kind of gets us back on track. I want to talk a little bit about the war and what's happening there. Yeah. So here's an interesting question from Paul M. How significant do you think American intelligence is in assisting the Ukrainian military to find and attack Russian targets?
I don't want to say too much here, but I'm going to limit myself to saying that is incredibly significant and absolutely crucial, especially when it comes to electronic warfare and geospatial intelligence. It is mission critical, and it definitely changed the battlefield. It certainly turned the tide of war in favor of Ukraine.
Good answer. Something that Eugene mentioned earlier, Ukrainian military, to significant degree, started operating kind of along the lines of the American military. And I think the change started to happen about a decade or so ago. I think just before Russia initially tried to annex eastern Ukraine. And the current ability to use high-tech information, electronic warfare, and things like that is not an accident. American advisors have been there training initially Ukrainian special forces, and then I'm sure it went down the line for a while. So Ukraine had exposure to a truly modern way of waging war efficiently and using high-tech means for a little while. And one of the things that this Russian invasion did, now aside from training, it also delivered a significant amount of Western hardware to the Ukraine so that they can wage war in a way that really has not been done in Eastern Europe before. Can you guys talk a little bit about the aid and what the West has been doing for Ukraine? Enough, not enough, too much, all the waste? What impact has it had?
So I don't want to kind of overstate. So first of all, 8 years ago, when Russia initially invaded Ukraine, Ukrainian military was in pretty bad shape. The fact that volunteer battalions had to hold the water is a good testament to that. So I don't think there was much of any involvement of US or any military at that point. And even since then, Ukraine did participate, I think, in some limited joint exercises. I don't believe there was any significant, like large-scale training. Just to be clear, Obama was very much non-interventionist, and Ukraine got very little in terms of military hardware. They got a lot of sleeping bags, blankets, etc. Under Trump, there was more military aid going to Ukraine, but again, we're talking about more of a guerrilla fighting military aid, javelins, etc. Not something you wage conventional combat with. And it's even right now, you can kind of pull up the slide with the current state of the aid. The amount of hardware is by no means overwhelming. This is kind of 1 or 2 orders of magnitude less than what Russia nominally has on the other side.
All right, let me pull up the slide. There it is.
My information is a little bit different, not too different from what Eugene has to say, but
This slide?
Yep. If you can, I don't know, present it.
I'm trying to.
Okay.
How do you present in this Google thingy?
There is a slideshow on top right.
Oh, there we go. I see it up on top.
Okay.
Does it look bigger now? Because now it blocks my screen. I have no idea what's happening.
Okay. Yeah. We can see it. It looks good.
Yeah, perfect.
So there is a U.S. volunteer website that keeps track of. This is not even delivered weapons. This is credibly promised weapons. On the left column is the United States. Right column is the rest of the Western world. Russian contributions are not explicitly marked here. But it's probably majority of the hardware that Ukraine is getting is currently coming from Russia. So those are the numbers. So they're not nothing. They do not compare with how much we supply to Afghan military, for instance.
Well, isn't that not Chinese military? Or who did they sell it to? Do they still have it?
Well, depends. I think they still have good fraction not one sold. But Paul, you may have slightly different views. So.
Yeah, no, it's not that different in Canada. It's more along the lines that Ukrainian special operation forces, tier 1 and tier 2 units, have certainly gotten a lot of love and worked with American advisors quite a bit, which is definitely not true when it comes to line infantry units or line armor units. But their airborne troops are rock solid. Their Marines are really strong. And definitely their soft community, tier 1 and tier 2 units are really, really good. And they have gotten a lot of training from the U.S. military. But with that being said, I'm supporting Ukrainian soft units with Gore-Tex jackets for the winter that's coming right now. So they don't have enough Gore-Tex jackets. They don't have enough night vision. And certainly not enough precision artillery or armor or air defense, let alone tanks or aircraft to decisively defeat Russians. Ukraine will win. There is no question about it. Not even a little bit. But the cost will be much higher than it could have been. If we drop 200 HIMARS into Ukraine, they can evaporate most Russian troops with enough artillery and ammo inside of a month, if that's what we wanted to do.
Okay. Well, okay. So a couple of points here. One from an American standpoint, and keep in mind my take on this is a little bit different. I work with my day job is within the American defense complex, so I find all this stuff extremely educational. We finally get to use all of our obsolete but fairly modern stuff on somebody, and we know how well it works, right? So for us, there are really interesting lessons to learn. It's a great test bed, so it's great. Didn't Zelensky say somewhere like, guys, any weapons you want us to test for you, send them over, something like that? That was quite humorous.
Yeah.
So that's pretty interesting. But no matter how you look at it, for as long as the West is able to support Ukraine with hardware, and it seems like the resolve is still there. We'll see if it's still there in the winter when they shut off the gas. But for now, the resolve is there. Russia is losing the conventional war. So what's next? So Russia is losing the conventional war. What are they going to do next? What do you think?
Well, they really don't have much more room to maneuver. This mobilization effort that they're doing is going to be, in my opinion, very balanced negative for them. I think that's a terrible mistake. It's a terrible mistake because what they're trying to do is they're trying to recreate World War II when they would drown the enemies in the Germans in Russian blood by just throwing more meat into the meat grinder. It's very different now. High tech holds the trump card here. And unlike back in the day in World War II, they don't have troops with machine guns that are sitting behind these mobilized soldiers who are going to say, hey, you either advance or we're going to mow you down. This is not happening right now at scale. It's happening a little bit, but not at scale.
So for the normal Americans who don't know sordid Soviet history, during World War II, in order to properly motivate Russian soldiers, the Soviet military had this special quote-unquote political units, or whatever you want to call them, that were well-armed, well-fed, well-equipped. They were marching just behind the regular troops and encouraging them to move forward and not run backwards. Right? So Russia doesn't have that now. They did announce this mobilization, and I can't quite make heads or tails. I said 300,000 people, but then I hear a different number. So, Eugene, do you have any insight on this whole mobilization, how it's going, how the Russians taking it?
Well, last time I talked to Putin, what he told me is official
yesterday's phone call, yes.
Yeah, so official number that Putin talked about was 300,000. There are significant reasons to believe that this is not the number. They're basically willing to draft as many as they need. Some said that the secret passage in the order said over 1 million. Again, I don't have any reason to either doubt or believe this is correct. But I do not believe that 300,000 is some kind of hard number. They will mobilize as much as they can until they decide they don't want it.
And when we say mobilize, we mean mobilize, of course, because, again, all of this logistics and supply, that's going to create a huge problem. They cannot really equip their own military all that well. So imagine now they're going to have to clothe and feed and provide ammunition for, and by the way, command, control, communication, all of that for 300,000 completely untrained people. I mean, they served in the military way back when, but they're certainly not current when it comes to.
So are all the Russian generals going to sell their real estate in Switzerland and Spain to finance this, or
it's going to be a fire sale? I think they're going to have to go dig deep.
So within Russia, what's the attitude toward the Ukrainian war, toward mobilization?
It's really sad. Yeah, and I think it's a huge tragedy. I think that's the true tragedy there, that Russians are getting more and more to be against the war because now it touches them. And they're saying, hey, I don't want to go out there and die. Very few of them say, I don't want to go out there and kill innocent people. I don't want to shoot men and women who are defending their land. That sentiment is few and far between. It's now folks are saying, hey, this is for real. I'm going to have to go, and Ukrainians are going to resist, and it's very likely that I'm going to come home either dead or injured or not at all.
I think a good example, there was a few women demonstrating on the Red Square. They got apprehended, and before that, one of them was interviewed, and she said that I have 2 sons. If both of them die, who's going to look after me when I'm old? And I thought this is jumping a few steps ahead. Like, how about why do they need to die too? Them dying by itself would be a big tragedy. It seems like somebody taking cure when you're old should be very much a secondary concern.
And gents,
to each his own,
believe
right?
me, they ain't seen nothing yet. When they're gonna push all these people onto the front lines, and Ukrainians are going to start killing 500 to 1,000 of these a day, that's when they're going to feel the pain. The worst for the Russian military is very much ahead. So imagine you have a company of infantry, and it's being augmented by another company of these untrained folks. Whether it is a separate company, these people are going to run, and that's going to collapse the front, or they're going to be injected into line companies and platoons with already very low morale, and this is going to make things worse. This is adding fuel to the fire. They think it's the right thing to do. It's not. It's a last act of desperation.
So how are the Russians under this mobilization, or is it just going in, or are they trying to avoid it, escape, run off, head for the mountains? I don't know what's happening there.
By and large, I think that they're going in. I think we're going to see more and more pushback. We're going to see platoon and company size elements surrendering or running away or shooting their officers. So these are absolutely demoralized, unsupported individuals with very little military experience, who are not current, who are going against hardened Ukrainian troops with precision artillery and armor, and they're very poorly led, they're very poorly supplied. I think they're in for the shell shock of their lives.
Okay.
They have no idea what's coming their way.
So it's hard for me to tell exactly how does the statistic break down. So on one hand, we had over 260,000 Russian males exit Russia within a week after the mobilization orders. That's a significant number.
So where the hell did they go? Kazakhstan?
Kazakhstan, Armenia, Georgia, Mongolia is getting very popular now.
They had tourist season that they never had before. So Mongolia, basically every country that either people could have a visa for or does not require a visa is a destination. Tickets are booked until October. There are rumors that Russia is going to shut down all travel out of Russia. So far, it didn't happen. So some people are still able to leave Russia legally through the border, through airport. There are significant reports of people being drafted who have no military experience. They're in poor health, which tells me that they are struggling. Out of 142 million, you should be able to find eligible military-age males, given kind of overall conscription, etc. So it's hard to tell to what degree they're struggling. They definitely can get 300,000 people, but
yeah, it's a big country. You can get 300,000 people in a lot of places.
Right, but I wouldn't necessarily claim that kind of the mobilization is going well according to how it could have gone. So, and by the way, the first people called up already died on the front lines. So the delay.
Oh yeah,
That's
or have surrendered.
That's really odd. I mean, I would think that. I mean, I would think that if you have fresh people, you need to spend at least some amount of time getting them up to speed, some sort of equipment, something.
Yeah, you're making a tragic mistake. You're applying logic and reasoning to what Russia is doing. Stop doing that immediately.
I'm
going to stop now.
There are videos of Russian soldiers describing, not in captivity, still in their units, describing the circumstances, how they ended up in Belgrade, etc. So by and large, there is literally zero training. At best, they spend a day or two sleeping somewhere near the military unit before being shipped to the front. My understanding is that they kind of view this as 2 tiers. They're hoping to buy some time using some mass of people to be able to train some other people. That's my best guess. But I have not seen a single person reporting that they're undergoing some significant training. I have not seen those videos. I've seen mass videos from train cars by Russian soldiers in some random destinations, sleeping in the forests, in beds under the open sky. Those videos are plentiful.
Well,
but
the
Eugene,
whole open sky
I mean,
thing is going to stop as the winter gets here.
It'll be a very interesting question to ask Eugene. So, Eugene, imagine you're a U.S. Marine. You served in the Marines from 18 to 20 in some, non-infantry unit, non-combat MOS, and now you are 40 years old, and they recall you for active duty. And of course, you can compare U.S. Marines who are very well trained, no matter which MOS you have, but your average Russian military. But let's imagine that's the case. How long, in your opinion, would it take to train that former Marine up to go into combat?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question depending on how rigorous are the combat condition. To be honest, majority of the troops in controlled warfare have somewhat limited engagement. You need people to police the area, have physical boots on the ground, which could be used effectively. I don't think this is the war that currently happening in Ukraine. I think a lot of areas are front lines. So in terms of the front line, so I was infantry, so I do not know what not infantry MOS perform like. But even with people who finish infantry school, young people who are in good physical shape, it typically takes them 6 months or so to become kind of fully proficient as infantrymen.
I think we can agree that after you've been away from the military for a decade, which is the case with a lot of folks there, you need a month or two. I think we can agree on that. And Russia doesn't have that time.
So there is a comment here that there's no way Russia will only mobilize 300,000. It will be significantly more.
It will not be 300,000. I promise you. I am very certain of that. You can mobilize 300,000 people. You can, but how are you gonna get them warm winter gear? So you need 300,000 pieces of warm winter gear, and as Eugene will testify, 2 is 1 and 1 and none. So you need probably a backup for that. You lose it, it gets dirty, it gets ripped. How are you going to give them weapons? How are you going to give them ammo? How are you going to give them water? How are you going to give them food? How are you going to transport them? You're going to need fuel. You're going to need radios. It's not going to happen. It's not. And if they're going to push 300,000 people to the front, they're going to be underfed, undersupported, undercommanded. They're not going to push 300,000 fully ready to go regiments and battalions, well equipped and well led, with command and control, onto the front ever. It's not going to happen.
I guess maybe because I see so many Russian videos, the state is kind of somewhat transparent. But for those who perhaps don't watch as many of them, you see troops in garrison, not on the front line, who are saying that they have to buy food with their own money. They were able to find some rounds on the floor. This is what they have before they're being shipped. They had the medical officer telling soldiers that they need to call home and ask for women to send tampons to treat bullet wounds and pads, because she doesn't have any medical supplies for them. This is in garrison. They have not been hit. They're still being trained, allegedly.
Yeah, that video I've seen, yes.
Yeah, that's a great point. I forgot about medical. How do you medevac folks? How do you treat them there? Do you have enough antiseptic? Do you have morphine? And the answer to that is hell no. Absolutely not.
Do you know that Russian military doctrine doesn't have term for medevac?
Not surprised.
Doesn't have term for what?
Medevac.
Yeah, well, I mean, wasn't there? Was a famous story how after World War II, Zhukov and Eisenhower crossed paths somewhere, and Eisenhower was wondering with Zhukov, the Russian marshal. How do you deal with all of the prisoners of war and all the captives? How do you feed them, clothe them? And Zhukov was so surprised that Americans actually feed them, clothe them, and care if they live or die.
Absolutely.
The Russian military has never really cared that much about the lives of soldiers. Anyhow,
they're still a very, very formidable force to reckon with, particularly taking into view, and maybe we can jump into this at some point, taking into account the new type of warfare that I saw, that's drone warfare supported by artillery and armor. There's a lot of artillery there, and they have a lot of ammo, and it's very, very dangerous. Interestingly, in my estimation, about 75 to 80% of death and injury is not from bullets. It's all shrapnel, debris, and blast. These are the injuries that the Ukrainians are
So
getting.
that was actually where I wanted to go next.
Sure.
How is the high-tech part of the warfare done? We talked a little bit about how it's done in Ukraine. They do have superior intelligence and airborne assets thanks to support from the West. How is Russia doing this? Do they have capable precision munitions, or is it more old-style artillery, howitzers and stuff? How does it work there?
It's all artillery. It's a tremendous amount of artillery with drones that are able to provide targeting to artillery units. A lot of these drones are very cheap, specifically Orlan 10. That is basically a science fair project, if you will. But there are a lot of them. When you're in Kharkiv and in surrounding areas, at least when I was there, those drones are overhead 24/7. You never escape them. And you hear either incoming or outgoing artillery 24/7. It never stops.
But yes, when you're talking artillery, you're talking cannons, howitzers. You're not talking precision munitions.
No. And frankly, you don't really need super precision munitions, because drones can certainly spot for artillery and correct artillery fires pretty quickly. And Russians are getting, that's another thing about Russians. So they're not woefully incompetent. They're also learning. And the ones who have survived, interesting statistic that I've heard from multiple folks, 0 airborne or marine or special operation personnel who were in the initial invasion are still around. They're either injured, killed, or they're out of the military. I think 0 is an aggressive number. It's a big number, but there are very, very few who are still around.
So the second-tier Russian troops are now sort of coming of age in a way.
Right.
They're learning. The survivors are learning. They're getting better.
Absolutely, particularly when it comes to artillery, which is not as dangerous as frontline troops or special operations. But the flower of Russian special operations has been savaged around Kiev, Hostomel specifically, Moshun, and so forth.
Very interesting.
Well,
is Russian Air Force felt in any ways? Fixed wing, rotary wing, is it a major factor, or is it more drones, artillery?
Russian Air Force is still around. They have very powerful bombs, and in particular, white phosphorus munitions that are very devastating. They certainly use them to very good effect around Mariupol, for example, specifically Azovstal. If you see in any of the videos, you see just 2,000 kilo bombs or white phosphorus munitions that's going everywhere. But right now, Ukraine has a really solid anti-aircraft defense, including man-portable systems. Specifically, there's a lot of old Russian stuff, some Polish, some Stingers. That presents a challenge for Russian military. They're still dangerous, but they certainly don't dominate the sky.
Okay, interesting. So if we are correct, we all seem to agree on this, in terms of conventional warfare, Russia is not doing all that great. So
No.
what other options do they have? Putin keeps on threatening nukes. What else do they have? I mean, how does this end?
I mean, if we're going to continue supplying Ukraine with precision artillery, Europe is going to come through with some armor. Ukrainians are going to win this war. They're going to push Russians out of Ukraine, including Crimea. It's going to happen. Just a matter of time.
Okay.
So Russia will have no choice to either acquiesce or go attack nuke.
Well, there is a third option, right? So change of government would allow them, and change of government doesn't mean change to a friendly government, but change to a government enough that you can point fingers at the previous government.
Correct.
Yeah, that's what I mean by acquiesce, as in say we're done here. We're not gonna continue fighting. So the new government comes in, and they're definitely not going to continue this war because everybody knows Russia cannot win this war. They can't. And again, it's a function of Western aid. If we withdraw aid, it's going to be a very difficult situation. Russian, again, will not be able to push to Kiev, but they'll be able to hold that line for a very long time.
Yeah, so I mean, right now they sort of have their land bridge to Crimea, which is, I guess, that was probably the minimum that they wanted. I mean, they wanted more, but that's probably what they're going to settle for. A regime change in Russia, I mean, anything is possible, but it's not terribly likely. There's no real history of that in Russia. If no one put a bullet into Putin's forehead yet, I don't know how likely it is to happen now. Let's say Russia goes nuclear and drops a couple of nukes on some strategic target in Ukraine.
I don't think that's going to happen. I am of the opinion, and this may not be a popular opinion, you don't just like wake up one day and press the red button. There's no such thing. You need to prepare these units for attack nuke deployment. You're going to have to load these missiles, tactical missiles, onto supersonic airplanes, or you're going to have to pull up missiles that are sitting on trucks.
Okay.
And I think that, I hope, again, this is purely my conjecture, because I don't think the West can afford this. I think that this is, again, I can't emphasize this enough. This is completely my opinion based on nothing but pure conjecture. I think the United States and NATO made it very, very clear to Russia what is going to happen if they're going to notice, and they will notice it. There's satellites all over Russia right now. There is electronic warfare. There is just all sorts of intelligence being gathered right now. I think it was communicated to Russia in no uncertain terms what is going to happen if they even smile at a nuclear weapon. What's going to happen is we're going to launch dozens of Tomahawks, and we're going to evaporate Russian military in Ukraine. So they're not going to win, even if they drop TAC nukes. That's going to be step one.
Okay. I think that's a little optimistic in terms of Western response, but I hope you're right. Eugene? You look like you want to say something.
Yeah, I mean, very non-trivial topic. Obviously, nobody would like to see nuclear war. But again, like, I don't think we're likely to encounter stalemate at this point. And for me, probability of tactical nuclear war is about the same as Putin being displaced by somebody within his cabinet. So I think both are about, I don't know, 10% or so. So neither is overwhelming, but neither one is unfathomable in my mind. So the reason, I mean, I wish US would have the fortitude and be so clear in their communication. I also wish they would put forces in Europe to make it very clear and likely that they could do that. We haven't seen any signs of that. So it doesn't preclude us from using Tomahawks from somewhere. But actually, I do not know which assets we have in the theater, kind of how feasible even that plan is. So I guarantee that communication is happening. I hope it's better than the public communication with Obama
We
administration.
used to have a couple of nice bases in Afghanistan, just saying.
Yes, we do not have those bases anymore. Yes.
Oh, okay.
So, anyways,
Yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot.
significant strike against Russian forces in Ukraine, and I think this is the most likely option. I don't think US will preemptively strike Russian mainland. Still requires preparation, assets, etc.
Yeah. So we have seaborne assets, specifically nuclear submarines, that are forward deployed, that would be able to execute that.
I don't know if they have enough Tomahawks for everything you're mentioning, but possible. I mean, we do have significant assets in Turkey, but I don't know if Turkey would be okay with us launching them from there, right? Beyond that, there are some assets in Europe and a few random places. But once again, this all comes down to they are sitting on somebody else's territory that they get to say if we launch something particularly unpleasant.
Yeah, and again, we can always follow up with an airstrike, of which we have plenty of assets forward deployed in Europe. And if I had to predict it, and again, I could be 100% wrong. This is just my feeling of what is going to happen. Russia's not going to win in Ukraine. They're not going to do a nuclear strike. To Eugene's point, I don't see Putin going away because they would have taken him out a long time ago. I really hope that this is exactly what happens. I think that Russia is going to crawl back and they're going to say that they were fighting against NATO and that's why they couldn't win. And they're going to turn Russia into North Korea. They're going to need to lock it down and suppress the people and make an example out of however many people they need to make an example of, and then basically have like the same thing as what's going on now, but a lot more severe. That's my best guess.
Do you think it's possible to get away with that in Russia now?
I mean, the vast majority of Russians, let's not forget, are extremely pro-war and pro-Putin. And the only reason why some folks are against war is because Ukraine is crushing them.
Okay.
Right? If Russians were... So think of it this way, and I think you'll agree with me. If Russians were winning, if Russians took Kiev now, or were very close to Kiev, and you could just see overwhelming victory, how many people in Russia would be vehemently against the war?
Russians in Russia, I would guess very few. I can probably make a reasonable guess that a significant majority of Russians who would be against the war are no longer in Russia.
Could not agree more. And those who are against the war in Russia now would have left. Every single friend of mine, interestingly enough, that lived in Russia, when I would ask them, how can you live here? Like, what about the politics? They're like, oh, we don't get involved in politics. Every single one of them left.
Interesting.
It's very hard for me to assess the true feeling of Russians. Obviously, it's not 70% condemnation of the war for moral reasons. That would be very visible. But how many of them support the war in a sense that they view it as unmitigated good versus acquiesce to the fact that, well, it's politics, it's none of my business. Interestingly enough, most of the people I personally know in Russia are very clearly against the war. But if I ask them how popular is their opinion, they don't believe it's popular at all. So most of the time they cannot voice it at work, etc. So I do not know. I do not know.
Interesting. All right. So let's switch back to a couple of more entertaining things. So there have been some interesting recent events. Elon Musk is trying to solve the Ukrainian war problem. Pipelines are exploding, that kind of stuff. So we have a question from Mr. RSTX. Where do you all stand on who is behind the pipeline attacks? Any thoughts?
I have a strong opinion, But
Go for it.
again, it's nothing but pure conjecture. I think it's United States. I think we just took this option off the table of Russia putting pressure on Europe, and I think Biden alluded to it way before. He said something along the lines, and I definitely don't have the exact quote by any stretch, but he said something along the lines that
I've seen the quote. It's from a speech a while back where we can take
yeah,
out the pipelines. Yes.
exactly. So that's my opinion. Eugene,
Eugene?
you may disagree
Yeah,
with that.
I probably disagree. Yeah, I do not remember the quote, and I'm sure neither does Biden. And kind of that's my opinion about our current.
So, Paul,
administration.
just to translate, I think Eugene said you just had a Biden moment. So.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
So yeah, I view it as extremely unlikely because it's a decisive, calculating move, and this is not the president that would do this. Not only that, but in the United States, secrets don't stay secrets for too long. So you expect that this is going to be a public knowledge, and this public knowledge will ruin relationship with Europe for a very long time. And again, takes very strong, clear thinking person who believes in their sense of direction. This is not the administration. There is no way. Unfortunately, I have a conventional opinion. I think it is Russia in some form. Question is, so Russia is, I do not think it's homogeneous. And right now, this is breaking up a little bit. You can see bickering in the public between Gerasimov and Kadyrov and head of Wagner Group, because all of them have their private armies at this point, and the central power, Putin, is not strong enough apparently to keep them quiet. So I believe
happy with them fighting each other, right?
I don't think so. I think this is a sign of kind of the cracks. That's why I'm not 100% discounting possibility that Putin will depart in one way or another, even though it didn't happen yet. Because right now it becomes obvious that they have much more to gain from him going than staying. So my best interpretation, and again, like all of those, it's not obviously this is the case, but my best interpretation, this is the hawks within Russia who wanted to make sure that this will be the war and will execute it to the extent Russia can, and yeah, I guess it cannot be Ukraine. They don't have the assets. Correct. Even though for Ukraine would
something up 70 miles underwater is not so simple.
Yeah, but they would be the most logical entity in terms of kind of, they do not want entente between Europe and Russia, right? While war is ongoing. I'm sorry, Paul. I do not see US doing it with the current administration. If we had somebody like Churchill in charge, maybe.
Or Reagan, for that matter. Ronald Reagan could pull it off.
Yeah. So,
as a secret deal, I don't know.
I don't think US did it, although it's possible. I don't think US did it for several reasons. The biggest is, part of it is, I'm sort of with Eugene. I don't think the people in power now know how to spell pipeline or Russia or can find Europe on the map. But there are two pipelines. Each pipeline has two pipes. Of those 4 pipes total, one of them is still currently delivering gas to Europe, and that one did not get blown up. They managed to blow up the 3 pipes, 1.5 pipelines, 3 pipes that were filled with gas but were not delivering anything. The one that's actually generating some income for Russia is still flowing, right? So there are 2 possibilities, and I had someone on my website send me a link from a guy who seems to know a lot about pipelines, saying that when you have a pipeline just sitting there with gas and not flowing, you can have what's called hydrate plugs. And if you don't do proper maintenance and don't know what you're doing for sure, etc., they just blow up. I find it somewhat far-fetched, although I'm not a specialist on pipelines, because having 3 explosions within 17 hours as industrial accidents sounds a little far-fetched to me, although if Russians were trying to quietly fix them, It's possible. I'm inclined to think it is Russian sabotage because the one pipe that's actually making the money is still flowing. But once again, it's conjecture.
Yeah.
All right, Mr. Tata says, of course, it was Biden. Okay.
Personally,
yeah,
not
Biden was there in a scuba suit. All right.
Yeah. He went all Navy SEAL on us.
Yes. I like to think that if America was blowing up a pipeline, they would really blow it up. We, as a country, we have our issues, but you have to give us credit. When you really want to blow something up, we do.
Oh, no question. And I think that's why we have the capability to do it. Maybe to your point, not the decisiveness, but when the United States military wants to crush somebody, they really know how to do it. They really do.
Again, like
I know, sorry, that's the gentleman who's posting. He's been here for all. Yes, I know what you mean. I'm just making fun of you.
Okay. I mean, I wish I saw this decisiveness and consistency in every single step of U.S. government. I think that messaging from Biden was at least unhelpful. In fact, kind of Biden was the one who offered Zelensky the right in the beginning. So it's very hard to imagine, which, by the way, would be significant collapse of Ukraine and definitely grant Russia a form of victory, at least initially. So very hard for me to see Biden behind it, given all of those missteps and the fact that he is the one who still did not disperse military funding to Ukraine, already allocated by Senate. And just again, I think people are under misconception that there are tens of billions of dollars of military aid flowing to Ukraine. We're talking about 8 to 9 at the moment that been allocated, not all of it delivered. And right now, executive branch is behind in terms of delivery. So again, like they could be playing a long game. Again,
Biden doesn't have that much time. I don't think he's playing anything long.
Exactly, yeah. When I think of Biden playing three-dimensional chess, yeah, that's
chance. But again, I think you're assuming that Biden is in a in a decision-making capacity to begin with. Yeah, I am very skeptical about him just sitting people down and saying, "Hey, folks, this is what's going to happen, and this is how we're going to do it." I don't think that he's there. I don't. And that's one of the reasons why I think that it serves our interests to do this, and this is why we sort of we did it. But again, pure speculation on my part. I have no idea. It's an interesting move, that's for sure.
Do you believe he was not informed?
Oh, I'm sure he was informed post factum, but I don't think he.
I don't know if I did it. I wouldn't tell Biden. He's going to blab about it.
It's yeah. So this would be a huge misstep, potentially criminal one, to execute move of this magnitude without explicit acknowledgement by a president. So post factum acknowledgements don't work. So I would, again, like, he doesn't need to mastermind it. He doesn't need to oversee detail of execution, but he has to know and okay it, because I do not think U.S. military or whomever would be willing to stick their neck out and commit criminal act in support of somewhat questionable change of state of the conflict.
Sure. I just again, I think my estimation of Biden's mental capacity, and I don't want to take us away from the topic at hand, is that they could have put some piece of paper in front of him and said, "Hey, we're going to do this," and he would have signed it without understanding what he's signing it. They may say, "We may take adverse action against the Russian pipeline," and he would have signed it, and he would have forgotten about it, and then they would brief him, and he's like, okay,
I think my original point still remains. The one pipe that is actually doing something useful for Russia now was left intact.
Yeah,
I can't imagine how that makes sense.
Yeah, fair.
So something that just brought up, I just want to address that for a moment, Mr. Tata, about the Duran channel. So I don't know what they've been saying lately. When this whole thing started, I listened to it for a little bit. Both guys there are clear Russian shills. I don't know if they get paid by Russia or not, but they should be. I don't know what they've been saying lately. If you guys haven't seen it, it's one of those alt-right-leaning channels. There are two Greek guys, one a smart lawyer from UK who worked for RT for a while, another guy from Cyprus. They make a lot of money, I think, by making pro-Russian conspiracy theories sound good. So, I mean, they have their place in the internet.
Yeah,
but I don't know what they've been saying lately, so I have no idea. Okay. Oh, that's interesting. Could it be a third-party organization of any sort, not any country? With great difficulty.
Yeah, I mean, you need.
This is not an easy thing to do.
Yeah, you need a subsurface system of some kind. You need, and you need to avoid detection. By the way, I mean, you can't be running submarines out there because it's all covered by sonar. Yeah, it's hard to do.
So I will say this: I think it's most likely to me that Russia did it. Second ranked possibility is coincidence in terms of industrial accidents, if you wish, hydrate plugs. We'll see.
Well,
all right. Switching gear. Go ahead.
If you believe in third party of this incident, and I think we've been speaking about it a little bit too much, then you should not exclude possibility that this was the other state actors. Again, I'm excluding Ukraine because I do not believe Ukraine had the assets. But if I'm claiming some millionaire had the assets, then so could Ukraine.
I
don't say
anything's possible. I'd be surprised. Okay. Oh, that's interesting. I actually think the UK executed it with a nod from the US intelligence community.
Yeah. And sorry, I should have been more clear. Who executed it? I should have been more careful. I think it's a NATO country of some sort. It could have been a UK subsurface asset. It could have been a US. It could have been a joint operation, which I incline to believe. Right. So, but yeah.
It's possible. In the meantime, the gas is still flowing. Russia is still selling some gas to Europe, and I'm assuming they're gonna turn it off when it gets cold to get some sort of leverage. Since we're going into a little bit into conspiracy theories, which is always fun, Elon Musk says that they should repeat the referendum in Eastern Ukraine administered by the flawless operatives from United Nations, and then see which way it goes. Thoughts?
I have a very strong opinion. I have a Tesla Model X with really big gaps in some of the parts. I would love for Elon Musk, instead of like, if he feels like tweeting on Ukraine, just come over to my house and fix some of the fit and finish in my Tesla. He has no idea what he's talking about.
I think Elon Musk has eccentric opinions on issues. Sometimes they're interesting, sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong. He did a lot for Ukraine in the beginning, providing Starlink, which clearly does not make him an enemy of Ukraine. I just think I cannot justify this opinion. Going to a sovereign country and asking them to hold a referendum by US about allowing conquering country that massacred significant portion of their civilian population to take part of their land. I think it sets a bad precedent in general, and I don't think practically Ukraine can go for this politically.
Essentially,
his belief in United Nations quite charming.
Yeah, could not agree more. So his thesis statement is, majority of people should decide that region's destiny. So that's would you agree? This is generally a thesis statement. We could go wild over much of impoverished Africa and Latin America and say, hey, would you like to be part of the United States? Attack some region and say, would you like to be a part of US and be US citizens? Vast majority of people are going to say yes. I bet you there are a lot of regions in Russia who would want to be part of Japan or Europe. For sure. But that's not how it works.
There was a story, some sci-fi author actually wrote it in the 90s, I think. Kind of a joking thing where they were doing a referendum during the collapse of the Soviet Union, whether they should be 15 separate countries, one major country, or third option was become part of Japan, and ended up being a part of Japan.
Yeah.
So
I
that
would
was
I would choose that.
But
it was a very, very funny story.
by the way,
see your point.
there was a referendum on one of the islands that Russia has about becoming again part of Japan.
Wasn't it
Russians-
99% against becoming Japan somehow miraculously?
No, they actually, this was during the period before Putin, and they
Okay.
voted for it, but their wish was not honored. So
Okay.
let's start with the
So
historical.
there was an honest election once in Russia somewhere.
Nice.
Just nobody gave a rat's ass.
That's true.
Yeah. All right, guys. So we I think we have had kind of an interesting discussion. What have we missed? What else should we bring up on this whole mess in Ukraine before we wrap up for today?
Yeah, I think there are a few interesting things that happened recently with military appointments in Russia. And again, I'm watching for signs. Maybe I'm watching too hopefully for the signs of facade cracking somewhat, and kind of bickering between the three that I mentioned before is one sign. Two, Russia has that building that you showed in the slide, their central critical command. They did once in a while they changed the name. So that used to be a very senior military post to be in charge of it. It was a colonel general, 3-star general rank. And recently, the gentleman who was running it for the last decade or so, sorry, it's not decade. The center didn't exist for this long, but slightly less than a decade. Was moved to a different role, and his successor is not colonel general, but just colonel, and not just any colonel. He was the head of ceremonial guard at Kremlin. This was his main appointment during his whole military career. So I was trying to understand what's going on here. Here's a very critical military post. And yes, Russia lost some dozen generals, but not hundreds of generals. So must be some general there. Apparently, nobody wanted to take the post. Putin trusted nobody to take the post. Very similar story happened with Western Military District, which is the main military district in Russia. That's Moscow, St. Petersburg, two of the main cities. Typically, this is a colonel general, 3-star general position, was given to a major general, so dropping 2 stars again.
Oh, interesting.
So either generals don't want to take high-profile positions, which should indicate something, or Putin really trying to pull loyalists in every single position, but at the same time sidelining others in the military hierarchy.
So, I mean, looking between the lines in some of the Russian news, it does appear like Putin is setting up the Ministry of Defense, Shoigu, and that team to take the fall for the failures. But I'm not entirely sure who he's going to replace them with, and whether they're going to just lose the war and then blame them, or first blame them then lose the war. I don't know really which way that's going to go.
Yeah, I think problem with Shoigu is that so Shoigu is Putin's loyalist. He was nobody until he was promoted to Secretary of Defense, and he owes everything to Putin, and he's disliked by Russian military. So yes, he can take a fall, but if I was looking for people around Putin who could take him out, Shoigu would be probably one of the last people.
Interesting. Okay.
There were a couple of other interesting points. One is Ramzan Kadyrov's right-hand man. Ramzan Kadyrov is the leader of Chechnya. His right-hand man, Adam Delimkhanov, threatened specifically Russian students all over Russia. And he said that if you're going to be against the government, then we are going to handle it. So essentially, imagine an Alabama state police, head of state police, telling United States students everywhere, if you're going to be against the president, we are going to come and get you. We're not going to allow this to happen.
Wasn't that the equivalent to what the governor of California is doing in other states now?
Does his reach extend beyond California?
He thinks it does.
So that's an interesting move, and also a very interesting move that Ramzan Kadyrov again and Prigozhin, who is the founder and head of this private military contracting army called Wagner, they blamed one of top generals for the failures, and Putin gave this general the highest award, like the equivalent of Medal of Honor, Hero of Russia, very recently. And Putin promoted Ramzan Kadyrov 2 days after that into the rank of lieutenant.
It was not supposedly his birthday
Colonel
gift for him
General.
or something like that.
Well, Putin's birthday is tomorrow.
No,
I believe.
Kadyrov's birthday.
I don't
It was
think
Kadyrov.
so. Was it Kadyrov's birthday?
Apparently,
yeah.
that was a birthday gift. In
So
Russia,
it's
there's birthday gifts. They promote people in the different military ranks.
It's a huge slap, and I think I like Eugene's point. It's a huge slap at the entire general staff of the Ministry of Defense. To your point, I think that they're going to have the Ministry of Defense, including Shoigu, or maybe save him, take the fall, get Prigozhin and Ramzan Kadyrov to rule Russia with an iron fist under Putin. And I think my prediction that they're going to try to turn Russia into a semblance of North Korea is not without merit, unfortunately, which would be a horrible tragedy.
But wouldn't be the first time either.
True. Yeah. Okay. Somebody asked, does UK have the capability of blowing up the pipe? No question. Absolutely.
UK is actually very capable. So once again, before we wrap up, I'm going to kind of go make a full circle and go back to the origin of this whole thing. One of the names that people on the right in America keep on throwing about is a lady by the name of Victoria Nuland, who's, I think, a State Department employee, who, according to some opinions out there, was basically in Ukraine organizing the Maidan revolution single-handedly, and that is what started it all. That is what took Ukraine from Russia's orbit. I find it kind of odd to, once again, going back to a country's right of self-determination, that one State Department employee can have such an impact on 40 million people. But then again, this is a little bit outside my field of expertise. What are your thoughts on the regional U.S. involvement in Ukraine? Is this all an American provocation, as people keep on telling us?
I mean,
Eugene, to be serious.
I mean, I think that we should not discount the fact that the United States is the most powerful country in the world, at least for now, and that we are pushing our agenda all over the world. I'm not a huge fan of it, incidentally, but I think that's the way it is. But to say that the United States orchestrated Maidan is absolutely silly. I know a lot of people who were there from day one, and it was spontaneous. With that being said, I surmise that it certainly benefited us, and we certainly influenced it in some ways. But we can't manufacture a revolution in Ukraine. Can't do it.
Yeah, look, if I believe that we had such a capable people in our State Department, we had two places where we did not need to hide our efforts: Iraq, Afghanistan. There are many other places where our efforts are pretty clear. Somehow, the only places where we succeed is where people already significantly pro-Western, and it's not clear that our presence is needed. So I find it highly suspicious. So no, I definitely don't believe it. Now, again, the U.S. has a lot of people. We have freedom to support this and that side and express our views for instance, in terms of events in Iran right now.
Mhm.
And our views do resonate. People do perceive United States as a force, and we do encourage protest by us supporting them, not by us paying people off to do this. So in that sense, yes, I think our words definitely matter in terms of kind of conspiratorial view that we're able to infiltrate and stage something. Russia couldn't infiltrate and stage overthrow. We failed fairly decisively in Afghanistan to achieve our aims. We did not succeed spectacularly in Iraq. I don't see any reasons to think that we have such a capable State Department, CIA, whichever resources you would point to.
Taking, I agree with you guys, but taking more of a bird's eye view, I don't like the whole idea of natural spheres of influence that everybody should stick their nose out of. Russia has been meddling in Ukraine, and every country has a right to pursue their agenda wherever the hell they please, and so do we. We clearly have interest in Ukraine, whether in Ukraine as Ukraine or in Ukraine as a buffer between Russia and the civilized world. And we have every right to pursue our interests wherever the hell we damn please, just like Russia does. And one of the things that's lost here is that, okay, even if all of that is true and we were more successful pushing our interests, it's Russia that started dropping bombs and shooting things. It wasn't us. Okay.
No question.
You want to compete with clandestine operations, political, financial, economic influence, go for it, more power to you. All countries do it, and I don't begrudge them the right to do so. Where I draw the line is when somebody starts a shooting war. In this case, it wasn't NATO, it wasn't the United States, and it wasn't Ukraine. Russia started the shooting war. That is one of the things here that is absolutely indisputable.
Could not agree more.
All right. There is, this is interesting. So let's do this. We've been here for a while. We should be wrapping up. There are a few questions that I did not pay much attention to. Let's glance at them briefly, and then I'll let you guys close whatever you want to add. Mr. STX, I predict Kadyrov taking over from Putin. It wouldn't be the first non-ethnic Russian in charge. Talk about God Emperor. I would almost want to see that. That would be just so entertaining for me in America. I mean, I think it's a little bit unlikely.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it's it would be horrific for me. I would love to see, even just out of the desire to see Ukraine free and not threatened by Russia. It would be horrific for Russia, and it would not be awesome for the rest of the world. This madman in charge of nuclear weapons is a horrific scenario. So I don't see it happening either. I don't think that Russian people would support it. They may put somebody else in charge who is a little bit less radical than Putin, maybe somebody younger, but still connected to that whole apparatus. They're not going to let anybody dismantle it, certainly. Exactly right. Yeah, I don't see Kadyrov really taking over.
Eugene, are you going to be the dissenting voice here? Kadyrov all the way? No?
Definitely most people in Russia, including in the immediate Putin circle, do not want to see Kadyrov. I mean, there is a difference.
Not just in Kremlin, they just don't want to see Kadyrov, to be clear.
Nobody wants to see Kadyrov, yes. Again, Russia has surprised me several times in the last year. This would be probably the biggest surprise. If that happens, I would not bet on it. I am interested in who are the other forces at play there. So if you listen to Girkin, who was one of his former FSB colonel, Russian KGB successor organization, who organized pro-Russian resistance in Donetsk, Lugansk. He was kind of the first. He says that he's nationalist. Others think he is an operative. I don't have any way to adjudicate this. But he clearly very much pro-Russian. He is not actively involved in the military operations, but he has been very outspoken, and recently his profile has been rising. I do not think he is the likely successor, but I do believe that he works with somebody who gives him this access. And his position was very interesting. So first of all, I learned more from state of the combat from Russian sources than from Ukrainian. Ukraine typically tends to keep their mouths shut until it's very clear what has happened, which comes with a 2-3 day delay. Russian sources discuss what happened, not official Russian sources, I should say.
All the meal bloggers and all those, yeah.
Correct. Yeah. They're still pro-Russian, but they're more clear about what's happening on the ground. And I would put Girkin as one of them. He was critical of Russian efforts as of late. He was for mobilization, for instance. So he's definitely not dovish by any stretch of the imagination. But he expressed some interesting opinions that I hope represent a certain fraction of Russian nationalist wing, where he said that no, nuclear weapons are out of the question because there was no aggression against Russian mainland. And I feel like kind of he is doing signaling on somebody's behalf that look, there are reasonable forces here that on one hand would be acceptable by Russians, to they're not madmen. So it's again, his position is interesting, his commentary is interesting, his political views are opposite of mine. At the same time, he has been a good source.
Okay. Interesting, very interesting.
Agree.
Good. All right, next, Mr. Javaman. There are others besides Newland. You had McCain, Graham, and other politicians in Ukraine. CIA has had their part in revolutions all over the world. Well, I think we covered it in detail. The United States can pursue its interests wherever the hell they damn please. As far as the omnipotence of CIA goes, it's kind of an interesting thing. Like, we keep on complaining there's a bunch of bureaucratic fools and morons, and then the moment they set foot outside the country, they become, every CIA agent becomes James Bond. I'm not sure how, this is a cognitive dissonance. They're either super powerful or barely competent. You can't be both.
No, I believe McCain did it, yes.
I mean, he's as alive as Biden, so,
Pretty much.
Okay, and let's see what else we have. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, so this one I like. I've heard that Russia might have blown Nord Stream because they would have to pay massive penalties for not supplying enough gas to meet the contracted quotas. Once you blow them, contract goes. This is the part. This is such a American point of view. Does anybody think that Russia gives a rat's ass about any contracts at this stage?
Nope.
I'd be surprised.
So I'm not familiar with how valid the thrust of the argument is. Russia does care because, well, it needs money. And so far, West have been pretty good still as a source of money for Russia.
Correct.
So again, they're buying weapons from Iran, from North Korea, from wherever they can get their hands on them. But those other people, they want money. This is not a friendly gesture.
Of course. But I mean, the point is that if they don't supply enough gas, they'll face penalties. I don't think Russia cares about penalties. If Germany needs gas, they will not care about penalties either. I think we're kind of past the contractual law stage. I think that was behind us the moment Russia started shooting things in Ukraine.
Absolutely agree.
And okay, there was a question here about some sort of event, but it was a little while back. I'm not sure what it was. What is the real possibility do we have for this event? I heard NATO, Russia, could China be one too? What event are we talking about? Any clarification would be good. I'm not sure what this refers to. Right, gentlemen, we're approaching the 2-hour mark, which is where I like to wrap these up. Any final words?
I'll just say that I felt like I had a glimpse into the future of warfare, which is very much automated drones plugged into the fire control systems of automated artillery, And I think that's certainly the future. Drones, from large strike drones, suicide drones. Everybody's working on tiny little suicide drones who will fly into a room and blow up. I think we're going to see a lot of movement and a lot of innovation in that sphere. So that's fascinating, scary, and very interesting to me.
When you have a chance, look up a company called Anduril, Anduril. They're not too far from where you live, and what they're doing in the field of loitering munitions.
I know them very well, and there's another interesting company smack in San Diego called Shield AI that is protecting, basically force protection against unmanned vehicles.
They do all sorts of fun stuff. Eugene?
Yeah, from my standpoint, this end game is extremely important because it sets a new precedent in terms of how to deal with essentially nuclear terrorism. Russia is not planning to use nukes as a tactical weapon to kind of break through the front line. It's an example of nuclear terrorism. Yes, nobody wants to see nukes flying, but also I don't think we would like to live in a world where a country with nukes can just point at another country and say, this is mine. So I hope people are clear about this, and our response not only reflects the view on this conflict, but tries to set correct precedent for the future.
Good close. Whether Russia uses nukes or not, it's going to end the same way. As Eugene just correctly pointed out, we can't let a threat of nukes allow Russia to achieve its political objectives, because that will set a precedent for using nukes for expansionary means. So far, political use of nukes has been really restricted to countries saying, leave me alone, North Korea, etc. It has not been used to expand territory. This would be a first.
And Jens, let's not forget that this is not a nuclear exchange in some area that we don't really care all that much about. If India and Pakistan do a tactical nuclear exchange, yeah, it's going to suck, but that's not really impacting us all that much. This is in the heart of Europe.
But okay.
Yeah, but this is closer to home, if you will. This at least for NATO, right? This is Europe, and who's to say that? First of all, these nuclear weapons are precise. I've seen what Russia can do with conventional weapons, which is insane. It introduces a degree of care and attention that's it's a little bit too close to home.
All right. I think this is a good note to close on. Europe is yet again ahead of the curve in terms of demonstrating innovations on how to fight wars. Usually happens in Europe. I hope all this wraps up in some reasonable fashion, but I'm not hopeful that it will actually happen. We're in for an interesting winter. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me. I really do appreciate it. And depending on what happens, let's do this again when there is more new material to cover.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.